Welcome to Made in Walker, the podcast that connects you to the people, the stories, and the ideas shaping our community. From local innovators to everyday change makers, we're diving deep into what makes Walker a great place to live, work, and grow. Here's your host, Nicole DiDonato.
Flooding in Walker isn't one size fits all. Sometimes we get those quick, heavy downpours. Other times it's a little more gradual and the Grand River rises. But that's why we have City Engineer Scott Connors to join us for this episode to talk about flooding, what the city's done to mitigate it, the types we see around the area, and what residents can do to kind of help themselves. Thank you, Scott, for being here.
Welcome.
Yeah, perfect day to talk about this. Looking a little overcast, but tell us the two types of flooding that we generally see around the city every year.
Well, I think the big complaints that we get are the first off is the flash flooding that we see like in a neighborhood. If the street's overwhelmed and the water gets up over the catch basins in the road, slows down vehicles, that's just as the name suggests, it's flashy. It happens right away. It usually subsides in a few minutes. The other kind of flooding that we get along the Grand River, we can really forecast and see coming. And it's a result of large rainfalls in the Grand River watershed. If you look upstream, you've got Lansing, Portland, further up at the very headwaters, the Grand River is Jackson. So if you get a big storm out there, a lot of times we don't see the impacts to that for 2 or 3 or even 4 days.
Got it. Okay. So then what does the city do to kind of prepare for that type coming?
Well, we actually got a flood wall along Turner Avenue that we watch. It's an integrated flood wall with the city Grand Rapids system. And so we keep track of that. We do inspections on that in the spring. We go out and check and make sure all the outlets are working and are effective. But along Turner and along North Park Street, those are some of the areas that we see both the flashy floods and the long-term, more late rising Grand Rapids flood or Grand River floods.
Yeah. And earlier this season, we saw just a heavy downpour, maybe some spots that flooded in Walker that we don't typically see year after year. So these 100-year floods kind of changing, it seems like, changing in terms.
It is, and there's a lot of debate about that. In the Grand Rapids area, we look at a 24-hour, 100-year storm as having 6 inches of rain, 6.25 inches of rain over 24 hours. But that's evenly distributed in a scientific and theoretical world. We've never gotten a perfect 100-year storm. It's impossible. We'll end up with flashier events, sometimes a long sustained event, but never for 24 hours straight. So the storms that we had a few weeks ago, we got about 2 inches of rain in 2 hours, which is a very high intensity. And on top of that, we ended up with about 3 total inches of rain, but it was spread probably over 4 or 5 hours throughout the evening. But those 2 inches are so intense, it overwhelms the storm sewer systems in the streets, some of the backyard ditches, and so then we see that localized flooding.
Yeah, and many people may not realize, but when there are these types of storms, you and our public works crews, you guys are out driving around. It doesn't matter what time of night, 2 a.m., whenever it is, you're out kind of keeping an eye on these things in the dark.
Yeah, and that's a big part of our job, too, is to forecast that. And in this last event, I was really proud of our guys in Public Works. They could see this coming, and one of our senior members back there, Pat Poss, was able to kind of pull the trigger to get all of our crews out the day before to clean off catch basin grates, to get rid of sticks and leaves, to clean out pipes that may have been plugged, and basically open the system up so we didn't see any impediments that would cause even more localized flooding.
Sure. And what other types of tools and such do you use for monitoring this type of flooding?
The National Weather Service has some great tools that we look at to look at the river levels, and we use that extensively in forecasting what we may have coming. And a few years back, we had a lot of flooding that was Grand River related. You can monitor that. You can see it again 2 or 3 or 4 days in advance. And the National Weather Service provides predicted levels. And so we'll look at that. And if we see a situation that might impact some of our industrial businesses, perhaps on Turner, what we've done previously is we've gone out and told them in advance, hey, it's time to get your expensive equipment off the floor in these areas. You may want to put stuff up on blocks. You may want to move some things around, because we're liable to see upwards of 1 foot or 2 of water in the road. And in some of those businesses that have been there for a long time, even in their the floors of their manufacturing facilities.
Okay. So we were seeing what the city does and that, being proactive and doing the outreach to businesses and such. What can residents typically do to help themselves and reduce that risk?
Yeah, I think a really big part of that is to keep track of the drainage that's on your property. So if you've got storm sewer in your backyard or catch basins where the surface water goes, or even a ditch, make sure that you keep those things clean. And so if they need to be mowed, you should, do that on a regular basis. If you've got leaves that you want to blow or sticks that you want to put up in a pile, don't put them back there where they're going to wash in and plug up a pipe or a drain, because that just makes the whole system suffer at that point. And everybody upstream has to deal with higher water until that plug can be removed.
Gosh, really is a domino effect when you think about it. Maybe a misconception, too, that we hear is whenever there's a new development going on in Walker, how will that impact flooding, other folks, their properties, things like that?
Yeah, I think if you go back into development that's post-World War II, we would just throw up developments and not think about the stormwater. But every time you take down a forested area and put in a paved and rooftop area, it changes how the water gets back into the ground. And so we see less infiltration. And with that, you have more outlet, more outflow from those sites. We've learned in the 70s and 80s, and especially now, that it's important for us to put in controls to help mitigate that. So now we put in things like detention ponds. We look for ways that we can put water back into the ground through infiltration. So now we have to look at the kind of soils that are on a site when it develops. But I guess overall, we've got an ordinance here in Walker and all through Kent County and our neighboring counties that's a very comprehensive set of rules so that when a new development comes in, we can make those mitigations. And oftentimes we can even take the peak off the existing storms and make things just a little bit better.
Well, good information to know. But when it comes to flood insurance, is that something that our Walker residents are actually eligible to try? And
they are.
Okay.
And we get a lot of questions about that. So we are part of the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, which is a federal program that allows insurance agents to then sell flood protection to our residents. If we're not a part of that program, then the insurance agents aren't obligated to provide that insurance. So even if you're outside of a floodplain, if you're worried about localized flooding, you can still go get that flood insurance and have protections for your basement, for your water heaters and furnaces and critical items that wouldn't be available if we weren't following those federal guidelines as a city.
All right. And as far as that flood insurance or certain areas where there's flooding, is there more specific parts in Walker that is more prone to it? If people move into that area, they know that they are part of a floodplain?
Yeah, I think a lot of the older neighborhoods, and again, the post-World War II neighborhoods where there was no thought or care given about stormwater, it was just send it downstream as quick as you can and get back on with your life. Those areas are a little bit more troublesome. So the older neighborhoods, the newer neighborhoods traditionally have storm sewer systems that are sized appropriately. We have detention. We have multiple, redundancy in our catch basin system. So if one plugs, it's going to flow into another one without damaging a home. And then we also take great care with our building department to make sure that homes are built at the proper elevation. In the past, a lot of times somebody might look at a house and say, I'd like to have a walkout basement there because it's worth more money and more fun for me. But then they lower that elevation and they get it too far down where maybe it is subject to flooding.
So when you are meeting with developers too and looking at, because we do have some new neighborhoods and developments that will be going up, especially in the next 10 years, even or sooner than that, what are some of the considerations that you guys talk through? Yeah.
Well, I think we take a look at a lot of different things. We look at the Kent County Drain Commissioner's system because there's a lot of areas that are served by larger drains that are part of Kent County Drain Association or Drain Commission. We also take a look at previous issues where we had localized flooding, and we try to mitigate that as best we can. So if somebody wants to go in and build in an area that we know has had flooding, we make sure that they compensate for any kind of flood storage that they'll be eliminating with their project. So oftentimes they have to build much more detention or a floodplain kind of an area where water that sat before can sit again, in addition to all the additional water that they'll be creating.
Yeah, very good information to know that these precautions are being, put into place and taken by everyone involved. So what is, a big takeaway that residents can take away from this podcast and the information that you're giving about the flooding?
Well, I think the big takeaway maybe is that everybody can chip in and everybody can take a role in this. Don't push your leaves out into the street. Don't push the leaves and sticks into your backyard where there might be some drainage that goes from side to side or into a ditch. And then just kind of watch the weather. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, we have to keep a close eye on that. There's nights where, as tonight, as we look out the window and see some stormy weather and potential damage, we have to be aware of that and cognizant of it so that we can plan ahead and take some mitigation if we can by keeping things open and unobstructed. Yeah.
Well, really appreciate the conversation, the great information as well. Thank you so much, Scott, for everything you offer. All right. And we appreciate you tuning in to this podcast episode.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Made in Walker podcast. If you have comments or questions about this podcast, or if you have suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Please drop us an email at podcast@walker.city. Made in Walker is the official podcast of the city of Walker, Michigan. You can find Made in Walker wherever you get your podcasts.